So we're just reading from Matthew 26, verse 57 to 67. Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers of the law and the elders had assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance, right up to the courtyard of the high priest. He entered and sat down with the guards to see the outcome. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus, so that they could put him to death, but they did not find any, though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, two came forward and declared, "This fellow said, 'I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days.'" Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, "Are you going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, "I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." "Yes, it is as you say," Jesus replied. "But I say to all of you, in the future you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the chief priests tore their clothes and said, "He has spoken blasphemy. Why do you need any more witnesses? Look, now you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" "He is worthy of death," they answered. Then they spit in his face and struck him with their fists. Others slapped him and said, "Prophesy to us, Christ. Who hit you?" And now I'm going to read from chapter 27, verse 11 to 26. Okay. Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Yes, it is as you say," Jesus replied. When he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him, "Do you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not even a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Now it was the governor's custom at the feast to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time, they had a notorious prisoner named Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which one do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew it was out of envy that they had handed Jesus over to him. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: "Don't have anything to do with this innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they answered. "What shall I do, then, with Jesus, who is called Christ?" Pilate asked. Then all answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him!" When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." All the people answered, "Let his blood be on us and on our children." Then he released Barabbas to them, but he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified.
Thanks, Jackie. There's some dark stuff in that reading, much of which we won't focus on today. Now, if you're thinking, "Gee, it's early for the sermon," it is. We're going to finish with the children's talk today, so get excited about that one. I don't have my remote. Thanks, Phil Hoyles, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. Thanks, brother. So as some of you know, we're going through a series as we lead up to Easter, Paschal, of good news, of the good news of the story. And today we look at the good news about suffering from the trial of Jesus. Can there be good news about suffering? I believe the answer is yes, and I hope that you will be able to see that as we go through this. There is a song that we sing here at church that if you've been really to any church in the last 10 years, you've probably heard. It's called Blessed Be Your Name. And I can tell you the first time I heard this and the impact it had on me. It was at a PY camp, a summer camp in New South Wales, a long time ago. And knowing that, you know, there are certain influential Pentecostal churches in Sydney. You know, I wasn't expecting there to be this kind of language in a song used at a Presbyterian youth camp. But the first verse, as we sang the first verse, I confess all I could think was, oh, seriously, why are these songs just not real? Because the first verse says, "Blessed be your name in the land that is plentiful, where the streams of abundance flow. Blessed be your name." Oh, doesn't that sound nice? But I know life's not like that. So my initial reaction was, oh, what is this rubbish song that we're singing? And then verse 2 came up. "Blessed be your name when I'm found in the desert place. Though I walk through the wilderness, blessed be your name." And my attitude began to change. And then verses 3 and 4 continue that theme with verse 3, blessing God, praising God when things are right. You know, when the sun's shining down on me, when the world's all as it should be, blessed be your name. And then verse 4, which you have on the news sheet that you received as you came in this morning. Blessed be your name on the road marked with suffering. Though there's pain in the offering, blessed be your name. Well, by the time we'd finished, my attitude to that song was very different, and I think it's one of the best songs written in recent years, because it expresses a trust and a praising God when things are good and when things are bad. When things are easy and when I am, in fact, suffering deeply. And so we come to this part of the story that Jackie's read to us, where Jesus has been arrested. He has been taken to the high priest, where the council are meeting for a trial of Jesus. And while I think, well, at least there was a trial, it's a bit dodgy what's going on here. But there was a trial, and they've come to their conclusions. And then we see him taken to Pilate, and we see Pilate's weakness there. And in the midst of it all, and we know this isn't the end of the story, but in the midst of it all, we see Jesus experiencing great suffering. And so at least one aspect of the news about suffering that is good news is that Jesus understands. Jesus understands what it is to suffer. And it might be easy for us to come to some weird conclusion that Jesus has no understanding of what it is to suffer. I was reading a book by John Dixon this week, a little book called "If I Were God, I'd End All the Pain." And one of the things he wrote about in this book was where he was at a university asked to present a Christian view about God. He did that, and there was time for questions. And someone stood up. It turns out he was a Muslim bloke, a leader in the Muslim community, very articulate, very kind in his argument. But his argument was profoundly different to the Christian view. How could a God suffer? How could a God possibly understand what it is to feel pain? Well, and I understand that view, but I'm equally pleased that I can worship a God who does know what it is for a human to feel pain, for a human to feel emotional and physical suffering. And so I begin with that. Jesus understands emotional suffering. As we read through this story, and it's a story that many of you will know well, and remember when I say story, I don't mean once upon a time there was. I mean history. That Jesus has been betrayed by Judas. Have you ever felt that betrayal, being betrayed by a friend, that someone's let you down? Michael Card, in his beautiful song called Why, poses these questions. Why did it have to be a friend who chose to betray the Lord? And why did he use a kiss to show them? That's not what a kiss is for. It's deep questions that are confronting to recognise that somebody I don't know could never betray me. They might dob me in for something, but it's a friend who betrays. Jesus understands the emotional suffering of being betrayed by a friend, of being abandoned by his friends. And in verse 56 of chapter 26, Matthew describes it very simply and quite starkly. Then all the disciples deserted him and fled. Now at that moment, Jesus has been arrested. He stands there surrounded by thugs, and his disciples flee. Jesus understands the emotional suffering of that. And then in chapter 27, we see Jesus being discarded by Pilate. The Pilate is the one who has the authority and the ability to release Jesus. And so he puts it to a vote, puts it to the crowd. Do you want Jesus, who's called the King of the Jews, or do you want Barabbas, this notorious criminal? And the chief priests have influenced the crowd, and so they cry out for Barabbas. And Pilate washes his hands of the whole affair as if he could wash away the guilt of his actions. And Jesus, again, although knowing that this is the path that is right for him, I can only imagine feeling the pain of being discarded. Your life doesn't matter. Soon, if you read on, or if you're here on Friday, we will hear Jesus cry out, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you abandoned me? And I want to suggest that while we hear that cry and we relate it to Jesus, that might in fact be a similar cry that you might want to call out yourself, or that others would. Imagine being abandoned by your friends at a nightclub. Not my scene, but it might be for others. But imagine being abandoned by your friends and left to the lechery of others who are there. Imagine being left by your parents at a train station as they've walked away and wanting to say to your mum or your dad, why have you forsaken me? Or, and I don't say this to offend or upset anyone, a child in the womb, removed, discarded, that perhaps that child might want to say, why have you forsaken me? Jesus understands emotional suffering, and I'm pleased for that, because I expect you know what it is to suffer emotionally to some degree. But Jesus also understands physical suffering. We see in verses 67 and 68 that having been interviewed and tried and condemned by the council, the high priest and the chief priests and the elders, that they spit in his face, they strike him and they slap him. There's something deeply humiliating about being spat at in the face. And they do this. And then they strike him with their fists. They punch him. Jesus, not offering any resistance, and still they strike him. And then they slap him, like Will Smith at the Oscars. They come up to him and slap him. Who was it, Jesus? Who slapped you? the physical attached to the emotional suffering that Jesus feels here. And then after being discarded by Pilate, we read this terrible phrase that Pilate released Barabbas to them and he had Jesus flogged. Now, flogged might be a term that we're not familiar with now, but here it is, Jesus being handed over to professional soldiers. This is what they do. They flog people. It means to beat them up. And it's not just beating them up with an open hand, but something far more drastic and difficult and painful and horrendous. In such a way that Jesus will bear those scars. And if not for his death and resurrection, he would have borne those scars the rest of his days. And we know that it's just going to get worse. Because that verse ends by saying he handed Jesus to be flogged, or he had Jesus flogged and then handed him over to be crucified. And the flogging that Jesus received is far beyond anything that anybody would allow now. But there's also a reason crucifixion doesn't happen anymore. It is horrendous. Now I'm going to take a punt here and say that those of us who have borne emotional suffering, depression, despair, extreme anxiety, that you would have much preferred to have had some physical suffering instead. If you have a broken arm, you can put a cast on that arm and you can see it being healed, or you know that it is being healed. But if you have a broken mind, you can't just put a cast on it. And you can find yourself wishing that you could, and it could just be, you would know that over a period of time the healing would take place, the doctor would check the x-rays and all would be well. But emotional suffering is vastly different. And if you have a crushed toe, you know that even though it might need to be amputated, there is a sense of healing that comes with that. But if you have a crushed spirit, well, that can remain. And so Jesus, who understands both physical and emotional suffering, is for us a wonderful example, a model and a hope for us as we cling to him. So there's that element of good news about suffering. There's bad news about suffering too. That won't surprise you. Suffering is never all good news. And the first part of this is the reality that every person suffers. Now, I'm going to say it's true that there are some groups of people and some individuals who suffer more than others do. This week, some men, after nearly 10 years of being locked in a hotel, have finally been released. This is an air of wickedness from our federal government that has been placed on these refugees, for which members of government will face their own, justice will come to them. But we would say this is a group of people who have suffered, and I'm going to say unfairly. There are others who suffer unfairly, but we all suffer to some degree. Some people choose to go through suffering as a means to an end. Some people go to the gym. Now, I understand why people do that. It's the thought that some people actually enjoy it that blows my mind. And they suffer. They feel the suffering of weights. They feel the suffering of sore muscles. They feel the suffering because they believe it will lead to something better. People go on diets. Some weird, some wacky, some helpful. And there's an air of suffering that goes along with that. Did you watch the Winter Olympics? Some people even do freestyle skiing. Now that's a world of suffering. I had a knee reconstruction some time ago, so I understand the suffering of a broken knee. The thought that some people do a sport that will likely lead to that and then wait for it to get fixed so they can do it again. Some people choose to suffer. But there is also that suffering that people don't choose. The suffering of a broken relationship. Sometimes that's husband and wife. Sometimes that's fiancés when suddenly it ends and one party had no idea that that was coming. Sometimes it's just children and friends, and the friendship falls apart. And children feel the pain of that. It might be unemployment when that comes unexpectedly. The death of a family member or a close friend, and the suffering that we feel in those times. But one of the interesting things about suffering, and the fact that everybody suffers at some point, is the way that people who have nothing to do with God will offer this question. Why does God allow this? People who have no time for God. Where is God in this? One of the great descriptions of an atheist is, well, somebody who doesn't believe in God and hates him, which makes no sense. But the question is there, why does God allow this? And so in that question there is a sense of suffering is wrong, and if God was good, there would be no suffering in the world. I'm not going to answer that question today. We can talk about that over morning tea. Just to say, the reality is that every person suffers. You can abandon God, but you know what doesn't change? Every person suffers. That's just the reality of humanity. The more difficult question for some people, or difficult statement for some people, is that every Christian suffers. In fact, every Christian should expect to suffer, which is the difficulty for many Christians in Australia, parts of America, even in England, is that we haven't suffered. Our Sunday evening study group, we've been praying for Burkina Faso and the Doulos Bible School there. Not just because Elspeth has a close connection to that school, but because that is a place where Christians are suffering because they are Christians. People are suffering for their faith. And if you want some insight, read 1 Peter, because 1 Peter, that little book in the New Testament, speaks much about Christians suffering. It's not the only part in the Bible in the New Testament that talks about Christians suffering. Jesus talked about it. But here's a bit of what Peter has to say. Who is going to harm you if you are eager to do good? But even if you should suffer for what is right, you are blessed. Seems a paradox to us. Even if you suffer for doing what is right, you are blessed. He then goes on in chapter 3. It is better if it is God's will to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. If ever we think, God, why? This is so unfair. Why do Christians suffer? Well, let's cast our minds back to Jesus, who was completely without sin, who was completely perfect, who was completely righteous, and yet understands emotional and physical suffering. The bad news about suffering is that everybody suffers. The good news about suffering is firstly that Jesus understands it. But I want to say to you, there is a second aspect to the good news about suffering that we learn from Jesus. This part we don't particularly pick up from the trial, this we pick up from the whole of the Bible, but come with me. Firstly, that Christ strengthens us in our everyday suffering. Christ strengthens us in our everyday suffering. You know that there will be some days that you suffer badly, and yet you will find a hope in Jesus. I well remember sitting with a dear old soul in Ballarat as she was heading into hospital and praying with her, and she was fine. She was wonderfully confident. But then she also said, I don't understand how people face these things without God. I don't understand how people can face these illnesses, these operations, these unanswered questions, how you can face that without faith. And I saw some of you nod as I said that, because you know that's your experience too. Paul, writing to the Roman church, said this, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. And what a hope there is there. We know that there is suffering. We know that we suffer. And yet there is glory that will be revealed in us. And if you were able to compare the two, you would see that the suffering is so insignificant compared to the great significance of what is yet to come. Now we can apply that in different areas of life. We just apply it here to our spirituality. We suffer, but there is something greater to come. The ultimate good news is that Christ protects us from eternal suffering. Now, I could spend time here on a dissertation about what is heaven and what is hell and what they mean and how we should understand that and why people should be scared of hell and why people should look forward to heaven. And we could look at pictures that people have painted over the centuries of what both hell looks like and what heaven looks like. The problem with doing that is that every generation or every era has their own understanding. And we could look at what the medieval guys, their understanding of hell, which is probably an element of hell, if not the whole picture. And our understanding in our age of hell, which is probably much more watered down than that, but there's probably an element of truth to that. What is hell, if not the ultimate separation from the God who loves you? So I'm very comfortable with the image of hell as fire and darkness. Even the paradox that fire and darkness can go together. But here, in the good news of the suffering of Jesus, is the protection from eternal suffering. There are two things that are clear in the New Testament. And I might not be able to give you chapter and verse, although Revelation points to it. But there are two things that are clear. One is that heaven and the new heavens and new earth will be glorious. No pain. Every tear wiped away. No more suffering. Wonderful. A glorious place to be in the presence of God, Christ our Saviour. The other thing that the Bible is clear about is that whatever heaven is, hell is not. So while some people might take the view of hell that, well, at least all my friends will be there, you've misunderstood hell. If heaven is a place of glory and peace and no suffering, hell is everything different. Full of suffering, full of terror, and no presence of God to calm that. The good news about suffering from Jesus and his trial is the protection that we have in that eternal suffering. God did not appoint us to suffer wrath, but to receive salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ. He died for us so that whether we are awake or asleep, living or dead, we may live together with him. Therefore, encourage one another and build each other up, just as in fact you are doing. So says Paul in writing to the Thessalonian church. And what is the encouragement that we are to build each other up with? That we are not children of wrath, that we are not children of suffering, but we are set free. Well, the good news about suffering from the trial of Jesus should encourage us. Jesus understands suffering. Physically, humanly, But the good news about suffering is what Jesus has done for each of us, which means what Jesus has done for you. For the world, for you. So my question then to you is, have you grasped hold of it? Have you grabbed onto it? Have you reached out for freedom? For freedom from that suffering eternally that Jesus offers in his cross, in his death, and in his resurrection. If you have, then lean on it. And in those times of suffering that will come to you, lean on those everlasting arms, find comfort in who Jesus is, and say, "Blessed be your name." Though there's pain in the offering, blessed be your name. And if you have not, then I urge you today to trust in Jesus. Just where you are. Even to say to yourself, "Lord Jesus, if you can rescue me from this suffering, I commit myself to you. And thank you for doing that for me." And that's a conversation I would very much like to have with you afterwards. We're going to pray. And then we're going to sing a song called Jerusalem that speaks of what Jesus has done and paints the image of the people who are around him as he suffers and dies. Let's pray. Lord God, we know that we suffer, and we feel it and we fear it, but we pray, Lord, that you will help us through it. We thank you that you understand what it is to suffer emotionally and what it is to suffer physically. And Lord, while we find some comfort in that, we thank you for the ultimate comfort that we find, that you protect us from the wrath of God. You protect us from eternal suffering. Lord, with that in mind, give us the boldness and the courage to live for you, and in the midst of our suffering, to glorify you. I pray this, Father, in your precious, most wonderful name. Amen.